All right, we are doing our trig functions, sine, cosine, and tangent. They are ratios for a right triangle. So anytime you see something like sine of an angle, this is sine. I'm going to use what's called my opposite side and my hypotenuse side. So I'm going to write opposite on the top of my fraction and hypotenuse on the bottom of my fraction. What I mean by opposite is when I'm looking at angle A up here, the opposite side is 12. And so I'm going to write 12 on the top of my fraction. The hypotenuse of my triangle is always across from my right angle. 13 is always my hypotenuse in this situation. It's across from my right angle. So the sine of angle A is 12 over 13. Sine of B, well, B is down here. My opposite of B is actually this side, 5. So 5 is going to go on the top of my fraction for sine of B. But my hypotenuse is still 13. It's across from my right angle. So sine of B is 5 over 13. So opposite is always depending on where my angle is. I'm going to do the same idea, but with this function cosine. Cosine works a little bit differently. Cosine is actually what's called my adjacent over my hypotenuse. It is the ratio of my adjacent side over my hypotenuse. Adjacent just means next to. And so if I'm looking for the adjacent side of A, here's angle A. My adjacent side is 5. Adjacent to A is 5. And so 5 is going to go on the top of my fraction. And my hypotenuse is still this side, 13. Cosine of B, though, here's my angle B down here. The adjacent of B is that side that is 12. It's next to my B. Next to B is 12. And so my adjacent side, 12, goes on the top of my fraction. My hypotenuse is still 13. It goes on the bottom of my fraction. The last trig function that we're going to learn about is called tangent. Tangent is not going to use the hypotenuse at all. Instead, it's my ratio of my opposite side over my adjacent side. And so when I'm talking about the tangent of A, if I'm looking at A, my opposite of A is 12, and my adjacent of A is 5. If I'm looking at B, my tangent, my opposite of B is 5, and my adjacent of B is 12. And so tangent of A and tangent of B are just reciprocals of each other. They are upside down versions of each other. Now, when we flip over to the back side and start identifying sine, cosine, and tangent, the very first thing we want to do is first identify hypotenuse, opposite leg, and adjacent leg. So if I'm looking at angle X, the hypotenuse is always dependent on my right angle. So here's my right angle. My hypotenuse is across from that. That's my 17. Hypotenuse is 17. But if I'm looking at this angle, that changes my opposite or my adjacent leg. So angle X, the opposite is over here, 8. My adjacent is what's next to, but then not the hypotenuse. So my adjacent is 15. Hypotenuse will always be my longest side across from right angle. So that is just to make yourself a little bit know it's the longest side across from my right angle. Opposite and adjacent are opposite the angle, next to the angle. If I'm looking at number 4, my hypotenuse. If I take that right angle, my hypotenuse is over here, 60. My opposite leg, well, here's my angle Y. my opposite leg is 33, and my adjacent leg is 55. And so I'm going to make some fractions, some ratios based off of sine, cosine, and tangent of these ones. So sine of x, if I go up here to x, sine is my opposite over my hypotenuse. So my x is here, opposite is 8, hypotenuse is 17. So my fraction is 8 over 17. Cosine is my adjacent over my hypotenuse. And so cosine of x, my adjacent side is 15, my hypotenuse is 17. So 15 over 17. And then my tangent of x, tangent is my opposite over my adjacent. So tangent of x, x is over here, my opposite's 8, my adjacent is 15, so my fraction should be 8 over 15. Let's do the same idea, but for y. Sine of y. Y is my opposite over my hypotenuse. So if y is here, my opposite is 33, my hypotenuse is 60, my fraction should be 33 over 60. Cosine is my adjacent over my hypotenuse. So cosine of y, here's y. My adjacent leg was 55. My hypotenuse was 60. So my fraction is going to be 55 over 60. And the last problem, tangent of y. Tangent is my opposite over my adjacent. So y, my opposite is 33. My adjacent is 55. And so I have 33 over 55. And those are all of my ratios I need for those trig functions. One special little note is that I want to reduce my fractions. So anytime I see an even number, I want to divide top and bottom by the same number. So 8 and 17, there's nothing I can divide by. 15 and 17, those I can't divide by the same number. And 8 and 15, I can't divide by the same number. However, 33 and 60, those I can divide them both by 3. And I get 11 over 20 as my reduced fraction. 55 and 60. I know I can divide those both by 5. And I get 11 over 12. And that's my reduced fraction. And 33 and 55, I know I can divide those both by 11. And so I'm going to reduce my fraction. 33 divided by 11 is 3. 55 divided by 11 is 5. And those are my trig functions. You're now going to go find these task cards. I want you to grab 20 task cards and write your answers on a separate sheet of paper. Task cards look like this. You need to do 20 of them on a separate sheet of paper. They will tell you to find sine, cosine, or tangent of a certain angle, and you use that to write your fraction. Do not forget to reduce your fractions at the very end.